Alright, in this Eli 5 we're going to talk about our damage calculation. Let's make this sexy, make it interesting. Here we go. First, we have our flat damage. This is going to be the damage that we see here on our weapons, or we see here on our spells. Our flat damage range is the first part of our calculation. Anything that adds to or modifies our minimum and maximum damage range is where we start our fun. Once we have our minimum and maximum values, we're going to multiply that by the skill's added damage effectiveness. Let's take a look at Fireball and see we have an added damage effectiveness of 240%. That means if we put added cold damage with Fireball, we're going to change our adds 4 to 6 damage to adds 10 to 14. Keep in mind that this effectiveness of added damage also applies to things that aren't support gems. So if you have a Hunter Helmet, for instance, with added flat damage to spells, that also gets boosted by Fireball's 240% effectiveness. Basically, anything that's adding a minimum and maximum damage to spells is going to be modified by Fireball's 240%. Alright, let's move forward onto flat damage's partner in our equation, increased damage. The thing we need to understand about increased damage modifiers is that they stack additively together with each other as opposed to multiplicatively. Let's take a look at this wand. Notice how it has % increased fire damage. Now let's go take a look at the passive tree and look at these nodes. We have % increased fire damage. All of these nodes and the wand modifier are going to add together to give us one total number. So what this part of the equation does is it'll take the total flat damage, minimum and maximum, and it will multiply those numbers against your total increased modifier for the relevant damage types. Seems pretty good, right? It's not. Because increased damage modifiers stack additively with each other, they don't scale very well. And that's because we're stuck inside this bracket, multiplying our flat damage minimum and maximum. It's about to become very clear why increased damage modifiers aren't the most important modifier to your damage. Unlike increased damage modifiers, more multipliers all stack multiplicatively with each other. This means that if we link combustion, controlled destruction, and elemental focus onto our fireball, we're going to take our flat damage times our increased damage modifiers, and whatever that number is, we're going to multiply that by 2.77. This is equal to a total of 177% more damage. So you can see why when we're looking to max out our damage, yes, it's important to get increased damage modifiers so we can up our flat damage range. However, whenever we get the chance to get an additional more multiplier, that's what we want because it's going to stack multiplicatively with every other more multiplier that we have. Let's touch on conversion real quick because it's a very important mechanic for determining our damage. When you convert a damage type, like taking Ice Spear and adding the Cold to Fire support gem to it, damage modifiers that affect cold damage and fire damage now apply to this skill. Because when you convert something in Path of Exile from X to Y, it is affected by things that affect both X and Y. With our Cold to Fire example, let's say that we take the Snowforged notable off the passive tree. Let's unpack what happens here. These are increased modifiers, so they do stack additively with each other. However, we get 30% increased cold damage to our base Ice Spear damage. 50% of that is converted into fire, which also gets 30% increased fire damage. So the bigger initial pool is converted, and that converted pool gets a bonus. And then that 29% of bonus fire damage draws from our initial, now larger cold damage pool, which converts into fire damage, which also gets that 30% increased fire damage modifier. You can see why converting damage into other types of damage can be very powerful. Last but certainly not least, your critical strike multiplier is a multiplier against your total damage. So our complete outgoing player damage equation looks like this. We take our base damage, whether it comes from our weapon or from the skill gem or a combination of both. Then we take all of our added flat damage values and we multiply those against the skill's added damage effectiveness values and add those to our base damage range, and then take our total minimum and maximum and multiply those against the sum total of our relevant increased damage modifiers. We set those numbers aside and we multiply all of our more multipliers against each other. And the product of all of those multiplied together is what we then multiply our base, minimum, and maximum damage values against. And then finally, if we crit, we multiply those final values against our critical strike multiplier. Always remember that increased and reduced keywords stack additively with each other, and more or less keywords stack multiplicatively with each other. There you go, everything you need to know about figuring out your base damage. The other side of this equation is going to be monster resistances, as in the damage calculated after you actually hit something. But we'll get into that in another Eli 5 video. As always, if this helped you, you learned something new, hit like, hit subscribe, leave me a comment. All these things help me out a lot. Until next time, this is Eli signing off.